What happens when one of the most respected actors in the world sits down for what should have been a simple, friendly morning show interview? In most cases, nothing more dramatic than a light-hearted chat, a few polite laughs, and a plug for an upcoming project. But on this particular morning, in just 28 seconds, everything went wrong. One pointed comment, one escalating exchange, and suddenly Sir Patrick Stewart was out of his chair, walking off the set, leaving the studio in stunned silence. This is the story of how Lorraine Kelly managed to turn a routine interview into one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. It began like any other episode of Lorraine's show. The cameras rolled, the audience settled into their seats, and Patrick Stewart stepped onto the set with the calm, steady professionalism that has defined his career for more than half a century. He shook Lorraine's hand, greeted the panel with a warm smile, and sat down. Everything looked perfectly normal. Another pleasant conversation about his latest work, his long career, and perhaps a few anecdotes sprinkled in for good measure. But from the very first question, something felt off. The energy in the room wasn't warm or welcoming. Lorraine leaned forward with a strange, almost predatory look in her eyes, as though she had been waiting for this moment. "So, Patrick," she said casually, "you've been in this industry, what, 50 years now? Must be hard keeping up with all these young actors coming in." Patrick paused. The question wasn't a compliment. It wasn't admiration for his longevity. It was a jab, framed as curiosity, but landing like an insult. Still, ever the professional, he smiled gently and responded, "Experience brings something valuable to any role. Age doesn't diminish talent. It enriches it." Lorraine let out a laugh. Not a warm laugh, not a laugh of agreement. It was sharp, mocking. She turned to the panel and said, "Did you hear that? Experience. That's what they all say when they're getting too old for the job." The panel laughed along. One woman with bright red hair added, "Yeah, at some point you've got to know when to hang up the cape, right?" Patrick's jaw tightened. His posture stiffened, but he remained composed. "I don't think passion and dedication have an expiration date," he said evenly. "I love what I do, and I intend to keep doing it for as long as I'm able." But Lorraine wasn't done. "Let me ask you this," she continued, leaning even closer, voice dripping with a syrupy sweetness that made the words sting even more. "Your last few projects haven't exactly been successful, have they? Reviews were pretty harsh. Do you ever think maybe the audience has simply moved on from you?" The studio fell silent. Even the panel members shifted uncomfortably. One young male host looked as if he wanted to interject but didn't dare. Patrick met Lorraine's gaze, calm but visibly offended. "I think the audience appreciates good work," he said carefully. "Not every project is a blockbuster, but that doesn't mean it lacks value." Lorraine laughed again, cruel, dismissive. "Art is subjective," she repeated, mocking his tone. "Sure. But let's be honest, Patrick. When was the last time you were actually relevant? When was the last time people talked about you for anything other than that old space show you did decades ago?" A line had been crossed. You could see it in Patrick's face. The warmth drained from his expression. His eyes cooled, his jaw clenched. The audience sensed the shift instantly. This was no longer banter. This was no longer an interview. One panel member, an older woman with glasses, tried to intervene. "Lorraine, I think maybe," she began gently. But Lorraine cut her off. No, I'm just being honest. Our viewers appreciate honesty, don't you?" She turned to the audience, waiting for applause that never came. They only stared back uneasy, clearly wishing the whole thing would end. Patrick finally spoke. "Honesty is important," he said, voice steady but edged with restrained anger. "But so is respect. And what you've done here isn't honesty. It's cruelty. You invited me here as a guest, and instead of a conversation, you've spent the last several minutes trying to belittle me. For ratings." Lorraine scoffed. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. If you can't handle tough questioning, talk questioning." Patrick interrupted. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, this isn't journalism. It's a personal attack. And you're not interested in my work. You're not interested in a real conversation." He stood up. The studio froze. And within seconds, Patrick Stewart was gone, leaving behind one of the most unforgettable walkouts in television history. "You just want to tear me down to make yourself feel important." Patrick's words hung in the air like a final warning. The entire panel froze. The woman with the red hair looked like she wished she could vanish from the set. The younger man in the suit stared at his hands, unable to lift his eyes. The older woman with glasses finally tried to step in, her voice gentle. "Patrick, I think we all." But Lorraine cut her off immediately. "You know what?" she snapped, her voice rising, her face flushing crimson. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't care about your work. Because honestly, who does anymore? You're living off past glory, Patrick. You had your moment, and it's over. And the fact that you can't accept that, the fact that you sit here acting like you're still some big star, is honestly kind of sad." That was it. The moment the entire room felt the line snap. Patrick stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture wildly. He didn't knock over the chair or slam the table. He simply rose to his feet with a quiet, deliberate calm, and looked down at Lorraine with an expression that cut deeper than anger ever could. Profound disappointment. "I came here today out of respect for your show and your audience," he said softly. "But I won't sit here and be insulted, and I won't give you the satisfaction of watching me lose my temper on camera so you can turn this into some kind of viral moment." He unfastened his microphone, placed it gently on the chair, and then looked at the panel, not with resentment, but with sadness. "I'm sorry you had to witness this," he told them. "I hope you find a better place to work someday, somewhere you're not complicit in this kind of behavior." The older woman with glasses nodded, eyes welling with tears. The younger man looked like he wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but no words came. The woman with the red hair stared fixedly at the floor, cheeks burning with embarrassment. Patrick turned to leave, but Lorraine wasn't finished. "Oh, so you're just going to walk out?" she called after him. "You're going to run away like a coward?" Patrick stopped. Slowly, he turned back to face her. "Walking away from toxicity isn't cowardice," he said. "It's self-respect. Something you clearly know nothing about." And with that, he walked off the set. The cameras followed him as he made his way to the exit. Shoulders steady, head held high, dignity completely intact. Behind him, the studio was spiraling into chaos. The audience murmured, some even applauding as he left. The panel sat in stunned silence. And Lorraine sat alone in her chair, face red, mouth open, looking utterly blindsided by the fallout of her own behavior. A producer rushed onto the set, whispering urgently in her ear. Lorraine waved him away, trying to compose herself. She forced a laugh, one that cracked under the weight of the moment. "Well," she said awkwardly, "I guess some people just can't handle the truth." But no one was buying it. The older woman with glasses stood up. "Lorraine, that was completely out of line," she said firmly. The younger man nodded. "Yeah, that was really harsh." Even the woman with the red hair finally found her voice. "I don't think that was fair," she said quietly. Lorraine looked around, at her panel, at the audience, at the still, rolling camera, and for a brief moment, the realization seemed to hit her. She knew exactly what she had done. But instead of apologizing, instead of taking responsibility, she doubled down. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "He's an actor. He's used to drama. He'll be fine." But the damage was done, and everyone in the room knew it. Somewhere outside that studio, walking through the building corridors with the same steady composure he brought to every role, Patrick Stewart knew it too. He had come as a guest, as a professional willing to share his experiences and stories. Instead, he had been mocked, belittled, and treated as if he no longer mattered. But he did matter. His decades of work mattered. His reputation mattered. The grace and dignity with which he handled the situation, that mattered most of all. Back in the studio, the show limped on. Lorraine tried to move to the next segment, but the spark was gone. Her jokes fell flat. Her questions landed awkwardly. The panel avoided eye contact. The energy had shifted completely, and no amount of forced cheer could repair it. During a commercial break, the older woman leaned toward Lorraine. "You went too far," she said. "I was just doing my job," Lorraine snapped. "No," the woman replied. "Your job is to interview people, not humiliate them. There's a difference." The younger man added softly, "He's Patrick Stewart. He's a legend. Why talk to him like that?" The woman with the red hair nodded. "That wasn't criticism," she said. "It was mean, and it was unnecessary." Lorraine said nothing. She stared ahead, waiting for the cameras to start again. But the truth was written all over the room. She had made a mistake, a big one, and nothing she said now would undo it. When the show finally wrapped, the panel didn't linger. There was no friendly chatter, no quick debrief, no soft laughter easing the tension. They gathered their belongings in silence, avoiding one another's eyes, and walked out as quickly as they could. No one waited for Lorraine. No one even glanced in her direction. The audience followed soon after, filing out quietly, many shaking their heads, clearly disturbed by what they had witnessed. Lorraine sat alone on the set, the studio lights still glaring overhead, the cameras now dark. The room, usually buzzing after a live taping, felt eerily empty. A producer approached carefully, as though nearing a wild animal that might lash out. "Lorraine, we need to talk about what happened," he said. She waved him off. "It's fine. It'll blow over." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. This wouldn't blow over. What happened on that stage would linger. Not because Patrick Stewart lost his temper, not because he caused a spectacle, but because he didn't. Because he remained calm. Because he refused to accept mistreatment. Because he walked away with his dignity unbroken. The interview had been meant to be simple, a warm conversation, a chance for Patrick to discuss his latest work, reflect on his storied career, and connect with the fans who admired him. Instead, it became a brutal example of how not to treat a guest. It became a reminder that kindness matters, that respect matters, and that having a platform does not give someone the right to tear down others. While Lorraine sat alone convincing herself she had done nothing wrong, Patrick Stewart was already gone. He had moved on. He was focusing on what mattered: his craft, his passions, the people who truly valued him. Because that is what legends do. They don't waste their time arguing with those who refuse to show them respect. They don't descend to the level of people trying to provoke them. They walk away, head held high, fully aware of their worth. Later that day, the panel shared their thoughts privately. "I've never been more embarrassed to be part of this show," the woman with the glasses admitted. Patrick Stewart deserved better. The younger man shook his head. "That was brutal. I don't know how Lorraine thought any of that was okay." The woman with the red hair sighed heavily. "I wanted to say something. I should have said something. But I was scared of how she'd react. And that was the real problem. People were afraid. Afraid to speak up. Afraid to criticize bad behavior. Afraid to stand up for what was right. They didn't want to risk their jobs or upset the host who seemed to hold all the power. But Patrick Stewart wasn't afraid. He saw exactly what was happening and recognized it for what it was. And with calm resolve, he made the choice to leave. It was an act of quiet courage. It would have been easier to stay seated, give a polite laugh, pretend it didn't hurt. But he refused. He refused to be diminished. He refused to play along with a setup designed to humiliate him. That is why he emerged as the hero of the moment. Not because he fought back, not because he yelled, but because he stood his ground with grace. Because he said, without raising his voice, "No, I will not accept this. I will not allow you to insult me for entertainment. I will not compromise my dignity." Lorraine, on the other hand, revealed her priorities. She showed that generating drama meant more to her than treating people with respect. She proved she was willing to publicly belittle a guest for the sake of attention. She chose provocation over professionalism, shock value over basic decency. The contrast was impossible to miss. Patrick Stewart, a man who has spent decades earning the admiration of viewers around the world, handled himself with class. Lorraine Kelly, a host entrusted with a platform and audience, used that platform to tear someone down. As Patrick stepped outside into the sunlight, the fresh air felt clean, freeing. He felt lighter, not because the moment hadn't stung, but because he had chosen peace over confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away. Back in the studio, Lorraine stayed behind to face the consequences she had created. The panel was shaken. The producers were anxious. The audience had witnessed every second, and the cameras had captured it all. Every word, every expression, every sharp, unnecessary jab. The older woman considered quitting. The younger man wondered whether he should speak to management. The red-haired woman felt guilty for staying silent, and Lorraine simply sat in the middle of the brightly lit set, trying to figure out how everything had unraveled so completely. But the truth was simple: nothing merely went wrong. Lorraine made it go wrong. She chose cruelty, she chose disrespect, and when Patrick refused to accept it, she doubled down instead of stepping back. This wasn't just one bad interview. It was a reminder about choices, about respect, about the responsibility that comes with influence. And on that day, Lorraine chose poorly, again and again. Patrick Stewart never needed to defend himself. His work already stood as its own testament: decades of iconic performances, celebrated characters, and a reputation built on professionalism and grace. His legacy was secure long before he walked into that studio. And yet, when he recognized that a line had been crossed, he still chose to speak up. He still chose to say, calmly and firmly, "This is not okay. This is not how you treat people." That moment echoed far beyond the walls of the brightly lit set. It resonated with anyone who had ever been belittled by someone with a microphone, a title, or a platform. Anyone who had ever been talked down to, cornered, or made to feel small. Anyone who had swallowed their discomfort because they didn't want to start a conflict. Patrick didn't shout, didn't snap, didn't descend into pettiness. He demonstrated something far more powerful: calm boundaries. A simple refusal to tolerate disrespect. And then, when it became clear the interview was only going to escalate, he stood up and walked away. That is leadership. That is integrity. That is strength without volume. And that is precisely why he left that building as the winner. Not because he got the last word, but because he never compromised who he was, even under pressure. Back on set, Lorraine Kelly faced a very different reality. She had assumed control of the conversation. She had believed she could push, prod, and provoke without consequence. Instead, she found herself at the center of an unfolding lesson, one she had not intended to teach. She learned that you cannot treat people poorly and expect it to simply disappear. She learned that respect is not guaranteed by a host chair or a studio logo. It must be earned. And she learned that the line between probing and humiliating is fragile, and once crossed, it cannot be walked back. The panel left the studio feeling a heaviness none of them could shake. They knew they had witnessed something wrong. They knew they should have stepped in, or at least attempted to redirect the tone. And they knew that by remaining silent, even uncomfortably so, they had played a part in the moment's unraveling. Silence may not create harm, but it certainly allows it to thrive. Each of them went home carrying that knowledge, and none of them felt good about it. Patrick Stewart, however, went home lighter. He knew he had handled the situation with dignity. He knew he had stood up, not with anger, but with clarity. He knew that somewhere out there, someone watching would learn that walking away is sometimes the most powerful choice of all. He knew he had set an example that transcended a single interview. What can we learn from this? We learn that walking away is not weakness, it is wisdom. That setting boundaries is not disrespectful, it is necessary. That refusing to accept mistreatment is not unprofessional, it is deeply human. We learn that the quiet strength to leave speaks louder than any argument. And perhaps most importantly, we learn that people who use their platforms to belittle others do not need to be confronted or debated. They need to be denied the power of our participation. That's exactly what Patrick Stewart did. He gave Lorraine nothing. No fight. No dramatic outburst. No moment for her to capitalize on. Just a calm, dignified exit. Because at the end of the day, Patrick Stewart is still Patrick Stewart, a legend whose body of work has reached millions, whose talent has crossed generations, whose presence commands respect without demanding it. One hostile interview could never diminish that. For Lorraine, however, that moment will be remembered, not as courageous journalism, not as thoughtful questioning, but as the moment she forgot that the person sitting across from her was a human being, deserving of dignity. So this is the story of what happened when Patrick Stewart sat down for what should have been a simple interview with Lorraine Kelly. The story of 28 seconds that shifted the atmosphere entirely. The story of a man who knew his worth, and a host who underestimated the consequences of forgetting hers. A story of dignity versus arrogance, respect versus entitlement. And in the end, the victor was not the person holding the microphone, or the person with the stage lights shining upon them. It was the one who stood up, walked away, and refused to let anyone make him feel small. It was Patrick Stewart. And that is how you handle a moment. With clarity, with composure, and with class. Patrick Stewart had always been the kind of man who made people feel valued. It was not an act, or a tool, or a performance, it was simply who he was. Every person he encountered backstage, from makeup artists to sound engineers, felt seen and respected. That was Patrick. A man who understood that every individual involved in a production mattered. But when he stepped onto the brightly lit set, and took his seat across from Lorraine Kelly, he sensed something was wrong. The warmth he'd extended so naturally to everyone else did not return to him. Lorraine regarded him with a cool, calculating stare, as though assessing how to dismantle him before the cameras even started rolling. The moment the first question came out, the tone was clear. It wasn't curiosity, it was a jab, a question about his age, delivered with a sharp edge, designed to make him feel outdated and irrelevant. Patrick instantly recognized the game. This was not an interview. This was an ambush. Still, he remained composed. He answered politely, attempting to steer the conversation toward his work, toward the theater project he had come to promote, toward the craft he loved. But Lorraine had no interest in any of that. She pushed harder, prodding and poking, hoping to provoke a crack in his composure. A viral moment, a clip to circulate, a spike in ratings. The panel saw everything. The older woman with glasses shifted in her chair, discomfort written across her face. She had seen Lorraine challenge guests before, but this was different. This felt calculated, personal, cruel. She wanted to intervene, but she knew how quickly Lorraine could turn her fury toward anyone who challenged her. Fear kept her silent, and that silence weighed heavily on her. The younger man in the suit, new to the show and still nervy enough to admire Lorraine's reputation, watched with growing unease. Was this really what good journalism looked like? Was this the path he had signed up to follow? Lorraine's relentless hostility made him question every assumption he'd walked in with. Even the woman with red hair avoided looking up. She didn't want to be part of what was unfolding. But she was trapped in the moment, trapped on live television, forced to sit through something increasingly painful to witness. And then came the comment, the one that shifted the atmosphere completely. Lorraine dismissed Patrick as irrelevant, reducing his decades of contributions to that old space show. It wasn't an inquiry. It was a wound meant to land deep, and for a fleeting second, it did. Not because Patrick was insecure. He had long transcended that, but because he was disappointed. Disappointed that someone would choose cruelty for entertainment. Disappointed that this, apparently, was what television had become. The audience felt the tension instantly. Gasps, murmurs, stunned looks exchanged among strangers. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was bullying broadcast live. When Patrick finally rose to his feet and said, evenly, "Enough is enough," the entire room seemed to exhale at once. It was as if everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to stop the spiral. With calm resolve, he stood, spoke his truth, and walked off the set. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. They simply watched him go, each step making him more clearly the hero of the moment. He had refused to play the game, refused to give Lorraine the reaction she wanted, refused to be a prop in her spectacle. Behind him, Lorraine scrambled to regain control. She forced a laugh, attempted a joke, tried to pretend nothing had happened. But her voice rang hollow. Everyone knew the truth, the damage was done. During the next commercial break, her panel finally found their voices. The older woman confronted her gently but firmly. "You crossed a line today." The young man admitted he believed in tough questions, but this wasn't toughness. It was cruelty. Even the quiet red-haired woman spoke up, pointing out how Lorraine had humiliated Patrick, never even allowing him to talk about the project he came to promote. And in that moment, Lorraine realized she stood alone. The people who were supposed to support her were appalled instead. But rather than apologize, she doubled down, insisting she was holding him accountable. The panel disagreed. There was a difference between accountability and attack, they said, and today had been nothing but an attack. The show limped to its conclusion, stripped of its usual rhythm and spark. The audience was unsettled. The trust had been broken, and Lorraine knew, though she would never admit it aloud, that something fundamental had shifted. This moment between Patrick Stewart and Lorraine Kelly became more than just a bad interview. It became a story about power misused, respect denied, and dignity reclaimed. Patrick reminded everyone watching what true strength looks like. Not dominance, not aggression. Strength is knowing your worth, refusing to let anyone diminish it, and walking away from a situation that does not deserve your presence. Sometimes a simple morning interview becomes a masterclass in integrity. Sometimes all it takes is 28 seconds for everything to change. And that is why Patrick Stewart will be remembered not only as a great actor, but as a great human being.